A white man named Nathaniel invites a young black homeless girl named Veronica to his office holiday party, hoping to offer her a warm meal and a safe place for the evening. But when the CEO arrives, he is shocked to recognize her as his daughter. As the night unfolds, the truth of her identity emerges in ways no one could have foreseen, leading Veronica on an emotional journey she never anticipated. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The evening air bit through Nathaniel's wool coat as he stepped out of Morris & Goldman law offices. His leather briefcase felt heavy after another long day of filing paperwork and answering phones. As he walked his usual route home, his eyes were drawn to the same sight that had been haunting him for the past week, a young girl huddled against the brick wall of the old bakery. She couldn't have been more than 12, her thin jacket barely protection against the autumn chill. Her dark hair hung in tangles around her face as she stared down at the cracked sidewalk, avoiding eye contact with passing strangers. Nathaniel's heart ached. Each day he had walked past her, telling himself someone else would help. But tonight was different. He couldn't bear it anymore. "I can't just keep walking," he whispered to himself, his breath visible in the cold air. He turned and walked into Joe's Diner just across the street. The bell chimed as he entered the warm restaurant, and the smell of coffee and fresh bread filled his nose. 5 minutes later, he emerged with a paper bag containing a hot chicken sandwich, soup, and a large hot chocolate. His hands trembled slightly as he approached the girl. Working at the law firm had taught him how to talk to all kinds of people, but this felt different, more important. "Excuse me," he said softly, keeping a respectful distance. "I noticed you've been out here for a while. Would you like something to eat?" The girl, Veronica, looked up at him with wary eyes. Dark circles underneath them told stories of sleepless nights. She studied his face carefully, as if searching for signs of danger or deceit. Nathaniel held out the paper bag. "It's still hot," he added with a gentle smile. "The diner across the street makes really good soup." After a long moment, Veronica reached out and took the bag. Her fingers were red from the cold. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Nathaniel," he offered, still maintaining his distance to help her feel safe. "I work at the law firm down the street." Veronica nodded slightly but didn't volunteer her name. She opened the bag and the steam rose into the cold air. Her eyes widened at the sight of the food, though she tried to hide her reaction. "The hot chocolate should help warm you up," Nathaniel said, his voice kind, but not pushing for conversation. She took a small sip of the hot chocolate, then a larger one. "Thank you," she repeated, this time meeting his eyes for just a moment before looking back down at her food. Nathaniel watched as she began to eat, taking small, careful bites of the sandwich. His chest felt tight with emotion. In his 10 years at the law firm, pushing papers and taking messages, he'd never felt as useful as he did in this simple act of kindness. The next evening, Nathaniel left work early, his mind focused on the young girl he'd met. He stopped at Joe's Diner again, this time ordering a hearty meatloaf dinner with extra mashed potatoes and gravy, along with another hot chocolate. His heart lifted when he saw Veronica in the same spot, though worry creased his forehead at how she hugged herself against the growing cold. Today he noticed a small backpack beside her, worn and frayed at the edges. "Hello again," he said softly, approaching with the warm bag of food. "I thought you might be hungry." Veronica looked up, recognition flickering in her eyes. She accepted the bag with slightly less hesitation than before. "You didn't have to," she murmured, but her fingers curled tightly around the warm container. Nathaniel settled himself a comfortable distance away, sitting on a nearby bench. "I wanted to," he replied. "Would you mind if I sat here for a while?" She shook her head, taking small bites of the meatloaf. "Do you—" Nathaniel chose his words carefully, not wanting to scare her away. "Do you have somewhere warm to stay at night?" Veronica's shoulders tensed and she stopped eating for a moment. She didn't answer. "I just want to make sure you're safe," he added gently. "Is there anyone looking after you? Family, maybe? The fork trembled slightly in her hand. Used to be my mom, she said so quietly Nathaniel had to lean forward to hear. But she died. Nathaniel's throat tightened. Died? He asked softly. Veronica stared into her mashed potatoes, pushing them around with her fork. She got sick. Really sick. Then the hospital. Her voice trailed off, and she didn't continue. Nathaniel felt tears prick at his eyes, but he blinked them back. This young girl had been through so much, and here she was, alone on the streets. His hands clenched in his lap, wishing he could do more. I'll bring you something warm again tomorrow, he promised, his voice thick with emotion. Would that be okay? Veronica nodded, taking another small bite of food. Though she didn't smile, her posture had relaxed slightly, and she seemed less guarded than when he'd first approached. Same time? He asked, standing up slowly. Same time, she echoed, wrapping her hands around the hot chocolate cup for warmth. As Nathaniel walked away, his mind was already planning tomorrow's dinner. He might not be able to fix everything, but he could at least make sure she had a warm meal to look forward to each day. Over the next few evenings, Nathaniel's visits with Veronica became a steady routine. Each day, he tried bringing something different. Warm soup from the corner deli, fresh sandwiches from the cafe near his office, or hearty pasta dishes from the Italian restaurant down the street. On this particular evening, the late autumn air was crisp as Nathaniel approached with a bag of chicken pot pie and apple cider. Veronica's face brightened slightly at his arrival, a change that made his heart warm. I remembered you said you liked apple cider, he said, settling onto what had become his usual spot on the bench. Mom used to make it, Veronica said softly, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. She'd put cinnamon sticks in it and everything. Nathaniel noticed how her eyes softened when she spoke about her mother. What else did she make? The best chocolate chip cookies. A tiny smile appeared on Veronica's face. She'd always burn the bottom, but they were still good. We'd eat them while watching old movies on TV. As she ate her pot pie, Nathaniel shared stories about his own day at the law firm. Funny moments with the copy machine, the office cat that sometimes visited through the window on the third floor, the kind janitor who always saved him the last chocolate from the reception desk. Do you like your job? Veronica asked between bites. I do, Nathaniel replied, though sometimes I wish I could do more to help people. Veronica looked at him thoughtfully. You help me, she said quietly. The simple statement hit Nathaniel right in the heart. He watched as she finished her meal, noting how her clothes seemed to hang looser each day. The nights were getting colder, and his concern grew with each passing evening. What's your favorite food? He asked, trying to keep the conversation light. Mac and cheese, she answered without hesitation. Mom made it with 3 kinds of cheese and crushed crackers on top. As Veronica spoke more about her mother, Nathaniel could see both the love and pain in her eyes. She shared little memories, shopping trips to the grocery store, watching thunderstorms together from their apartment window, her mother singing off-key while doing dishes. Each story, each small detail revealed felt like a precious gift of trust. But with that trust came a growing weight in Nathaniel's chest. He knew that food and conversation weren't enough. She needed a real home, proper care and support beyond what he could provide through these evening meetings. He watched as she carefully wrapped up the remaining apple cider, tucking it into her worn backpack for later. The careful way she preserved every bit of food, the grateful look in her eyes. It all spoke of someone who had learned to survive with very little. Nathaniel's mind turned over possibilities, shelters, social services, organizations that might help, but he worried that suggesting these might break the fragile trust they'd built. Each evening as he walked home, the question weighed heavier on his heart. How could he help Veronica find the stability she deserved while ensuring she felt safe and supported? The temperature had dropped sharply that evening, and Nathaniel's breath came out in visible puffs as he made his way to their usual meeting spot. Tonight, along with a thermos of hot chocolate and a container of beef stew, He carried 2 thick fleece blankets tucked under his arm. Veronica sat huddled on the bench, her thin jacket pulled tight around her shoulders. When she saw the blankets, her eyes widened slightly. "I thought you might need these," Nathaniel said, holding them out. "They're extras from my apartment." Veronica reached out hesitantly, running her fingers over the soft material. "Thank you," she whispered, immediately wrapping one around her shoulders. The simple gesture of pulling the blanket close made her look younger, more vulnerable. "The blue one is my favorite," she said after a moment, looking down at the blanket now draped around her. "It reminds me of the sky on a clear day." As they shared the hot chocolate and stew, Veronica surprised Nathaniel by asking, "What made you want to work at a law firm?" Nathaniel smiled, stirring his hot chocolate. "Well, I always wanted to help people. I thought working in law would let me do that, even in a small way. I'm just a clerk, but sometimes I get to see how the firm helps families or people who need it." "What do you do there?" Veronica leaned forward slightly, genuinely interested. "I organize files, help prepare documents, make sure everything is where it needs to be." Nathaniel chuckled. "It's not very exciting, but it matters. Every piece of paper represents someone's life, someone's story." "Like you're taking care of their stories," Veronica said thoughtfully. Her insight touched him. "Yes, exactly like that. I never thought of it that way." They sat quietly for a moment, sharing the comfortable silence they'd grown accustomed to. Nathaniel watched as Veronica carefully arranged both blankets around herself, making sure no cold air could slip through. "Sometimes," he continued, "I get to see people when they come in. They're usually worried or scared, but by the time they leave, they look lighter, like they know someone's going to help them figure things out." Veronica nodded, understanding in her eyes. "That's how you make me feel," she said softly, then quickly looked down at her cup. Nathaniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. The simple honesty in her words, combined with the sight of her wrapped in the blankets he'd brought, stirred something protective in his heart. Each day, the weight of responsibility he felt toward her grew stronger, more urgent. It wasn't just about bringing food anymore. It was about ensuring she had a chance at a better life. The evening air grew colder, and Veronica pulled the blankets tighter. "These really help," she said, offering him a small smile. "Thank you, Nathaniel." He noticed how she said his name carefully, like it was something precious to be protected. The trust she showed in accepting his help, in asking about his life, made his commitment to helping her even stronger. The holiday season had transformed the city streets. Twinkling lights hung from lampposts, and shop windows displayed festive decorations. Nathaniel walked with an extra spring in his step, a small wrapped package tucked safely in his coat pocket. When he reached their meeting spot, Veronica was already there, her hands tucked under her arms for warmth. The blue blanket he'd given her was draped around her shoulders, a sight that made him smile. "I brought something special today," Nathaniel said, sitting down beside her. He pulled out the neatly wrapped package, covered in simple red paper with a small green bow. Veronica stared at it, her eyes wide. "For me?" "Of course." He held it out to her. "Merry Christmas, Veronica." Her hands trembled slightly as she took the package. She unwrapped it carefully, as if afraid to tear the paper. When she opened the box to find a pair of warm wool gloves and a matching scarf in a soft shade of purple, her eyes filled with tears. She started, then stopped, her voice catching. A tear rolled down her cheek. "Hey, it's okay," Nathaniel said gently. "Everyone deserves something nice for Christmas." Veronica ran her fingers over the soft wool, more tears falling. "No one's given me a Christmas present since..." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Since my mom." Nathaniel felt his own eyes grow misty. He watched as she slipped on the gloves, flexing her fingers inside the warm material. "They're perfect," she whispered, wrapping the scarf around her neck. Then, in a voice so quiet he almost missed it, she added, I wish I had someone to celebrate Christmas with. The lights are so pretty, but they just make me feel more alone." The vulnerability in her voice made Nathaniel's heart ache. She looked so young and lost, sitting there with her new gloves and scarf, surrounded by the cheerful holiday decorations that only seemed to highlight her isolation. "You're not alone," he said softly. "You have me." Veronica looked up at him, her eyes still shining with tears, but now there was a glimmer of hope in them too. She adjusted the scarf, pulling it closer around her neck, as if trying to hold on to the warmth of his kindness. Nathaniel sat quietly for a moment, watching the holiday shoppers hurry past with their bright bags and cheerful faces. An idea began to form in his mind, though it made him a bit nervous. The law firm's annual holiday party was coming up this weekend, a warm, festive gathering with plenty of food and friendly faces. He glanced at Veronica, who was still admiring her new gloves. Would such an event be too much for her? The thought of her spending Christmas alone on these cold streets made his decision clearer. "Veronica," he said softly, "I've been thinking. My office is having a holiday party this Saturday evening. There'll be lots of good food, music, and it's in a nice warm building." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Would you like to come with me?" Veronica's hands stilled in her lap. She looked up at him with uncertainty in her eyes. "A party? With other people?" "Yes, but I'll be right there with you the whole time," Nathaniel assured her. "No pressure to talk to anyone if you don't want to. There's usually so much going on that nobody will make you feel uncomfortable." And she bit her lower lip, fidgeting with the edge of her new scarf. I don't have anything nice to wear," she whispered, looking down at her worn clothes. "Don't worry about that," Nathaniel said gently. "We can figure something out together. What matters is that you'll have a warm place to celebrate, good food to eat, and—" He smiled warmly. "Someone to spend the holiday with." Veronica remained quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the pattern on her scarf. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "You really want me there?" "I really do," Nathaniel replied without hesitation. "No one should be alone during the holidays. And honestly," he added with a gentle smile, "it would mean a lot to me if you came." She looked up at the twinkling lights strung across the street, then back at Nathaniel. Her eyes held a mix of fear and hope. "You promise you won't leave me alone there?" "I promise," Nathaniel said firmly. "We can stay as long as you're comfortable, and leave whenever you want." Veronica took a deep breath, clutching her new scarf like a lifeline. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll come." The smile that spread across Nathaniel's face was genuine and warm. "That's wonderful, Veronica. Thank you for trusting me." She gave him a small, shy smile in return, the kind that made all his efforts worthwhile. It was a smile that held the first real glimmer of Christmas joy he'd seen from her, and it filled his heart with hope. The evening of the party arrived with a gentle snowfall. Nathaniel waited at their usual meeting spot, his heart warming when he saw Veronica approaching in the simple but lovely winter dress they'd picked out together the day before. She walked slowly, her shoulders hunched against more than just the cold. "You look wonderful," Nathaniel said softly, noting how she'd tried to smooth her hair and wash her face in preparation for the evening. Veronica tugged at the hem of her dress. "Everyone's going to know I don't belong there," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Hey," Nathaniel said gently, "you belong wherever you choose to be, and tonight you chose to celebrate with me." He offered his arm, just like he'd explained he would. After a moment's hesitation, Veronica slipped her gloved hand into the crook of his elbow. They walked the few blocks to his office building, the snow creating a peaceful blanket of quiet around them. Veronica's grip tightened as they approached the gleaming lobby doors. Music and laughter drifted down from the floors above. "We can take as much time as you need," Nathaniel assured her, pausing in the lobby. "Would you like to catch your breath first?" Veronica nodded, her eyes wide as she took in the marble floors and crystal chandeliers. "It's so fancy," she breathed, shrinking closer to his side. "It's just a building," Nathaniel said warmly. "The people inside are what matter, and they're just regular folks like me. Some of them even tell terrible jokes at the water cooler. That earned him a tiny smile, which he counted as a victory. When her breathing steadied, they took the elevator up to the party floor. Veronica's hand trembled on his arm as the doors opened to reveal the transformed office space. Twinkling lights hung from the ceiling, and the scent of holiday treats filled the air. "Nathaniel, you made it," a cheerful voice called out. His colleague Sarah approached with a warm smile, holding a cup of punch. Her eyes moved kindly to Veronica. "And who is this lovely young lady?" Nathaniel felt Veronica tense beside him but kept his voice calm and steady. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet my friend Veronica. Veronica, this is Sarah. She has the desk next to mine and always steals my stapler." "I do not steal it," Sarah laughed. "I borrow it with every intention of returning it. Eventually." She winked at Veronica, who managed a shy smile in return. As they moved further into the party, Nathaniel introduced Veronica to a few more colleagues, keeping the interactions brief and light. He stayed close, his steady presence helping her navigate this new social territory. When he felt her grip loosen slightly on his arm, he knew she was beginning to relax, if only a little. "You're doing great," he murmured encouragingly as they paused near the refreshment table. "Would you like something to drink? The hot chocolate here is amazing." Nathaniel handed Veronica a steaming cup of hot chocolate, complete with tiny marshmallows floating on top. Her eyes lit up at the sight, and she wrapped both hands around the warm cup. "Careful, it's hot," he warned with a gentle smile, though not as hot as Bill's dance moves over there. He nodded toward a middle-aged man attempting to do the robot in the corner. A small giggle escaped Veronica's lips, surprising them both. She quickly covered her mouth with one hand, but her eyes were twinkling. "See? I told you lawyers could be funny, even if it's unintentional," Nathaniel said, grinning. "Watch this. In about 2 minutes, he's going to try the moonwalk." Sure enough, Bill attempted Michael Jackson's signature move, nearly spilling his punch in the process. This time, Veronica's laugh rang out clear and genuine, like bells in the winter air. "Nathaniel!" A group of young paralegals waved them over. "Come introduce us to your friend." He glanced at Veronica, checking if she felt comfortable. She gave a small nod, and they made their way over. "This is Veronica," Nathaniel said warmly. "She's got a great laugh, but you have to earn it, usually with some terrible dancing." "Oh, we can help with that," Jenny, one of the paralegals, said enthusiastically. "Wait until you see Mark try to do the Macarena. It's like watching a giraffe learn to roller skate." Veronica's shoulders relaxed as the group chatted, sharing funny office stories and holiday mishaps. When Mark indeed attempted the Macarena, she found herself joining in the laughter naturally. "I can't believe you have to work with these people every day," she whispered to Nathaniel, a genuine smile playing on her lips. "I know," he whispered back conspiratorially. "But someone has to keep them in line. It's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it." Their eyes met, sharing the private joke, and for a moment, the rest of the party seemed to fade away. In that warm, light-filled room, surrounded by the sound of laughter and holiday music, they were just two friends enjoying each other's company, all barriers and hesitations temporarily forgotten. "Thank you," Veronica said softly, "for bringing me here tonight." Nathaniel's heart swelled with joy seeing her finally comfortable and happy, even if just for this moment. "Thank you for coming," he replied simply, meaning every word. The holiday party was in full swing when the room suddenly grew quieter. The CEO, Richard Bennett, had arrived in his usual elegant suit, greeting everyone with his characteristic warm smile. But as his eyes scanned the room, they suddenly stopped, fixed on a point near the refreshment table where Nathaniel and Veronica stood. The color drained from his face. His hand, raised in mid-wave, froze in the air. "Veronica?" His voice, though barely above a whisper, carried across the now hushed room. "Is that really you?" Veronica turned at the sound of her name, and her cup of hot chocolate slipped from her fingers, crashing to the floor. She stood rigid, her face a mix of shock and something else, pain, anger, fear, all swirling together. "Dad?" The word came out choked, almost strangled. Nathaniel's head whipped between them, his mind struggling to process what was happening. The CEO, Richard Bennett, was Veronica's father? The same girl he'd been finding on the street corner every evening? Mr. Bennett moved forward, his usual composed demeanor cracking with each step. "My baby girl," he said, his voice breaking. "I've been searching for you for so long. After your mother." He stopped, tears welling in his eyes. The other party guests had formed a loose circle around them, watching in stunned silence. Some of the longer-serving employees knew that Mr. Bennett had lost his family years ago, but none had known the full story. "How—" Nathaniel started to speak, but his voice failed him. Veronica backed away from her father's approach, bumping into Nathaniel. Her whole body was trembling. "You weren't there," she said, her voice barely audible. "After Mom died, you weren't there." "I tried to find you," Mr. Bennett pleaded, stopping his advance when he saw her retreat. "When the accident happened, you disappeared from the hospital. I've had private investigators searching for years. I never stopped looking, Veronica. Never." Tears were streaming down Veronica's face now. "I ran away," she admitted, her voice cracking. I thought you didn't want me anymore. Mom was gone, and you weren't there, and I just ran." "Oh, sweetheart," Mr. Bennett's voice was thick with emotion. "Not a day has gone by that I haven't wanted you home." The room remained silent, the holiday music playing softly in the background, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. Nathaniel stood frozen, still processing that the girl he'd been trying to help was the long-lost daughter his boss had mentioned in rare, vulnerable moments. The holiday decorations sparkled around them, but the festive atmosphere had transformed into something more delicate and fragile. Nathaniel's heart raced as he watched father and daughter face each other, separated by years of misunderstanding and pain. "I was only 7, Veronica said softly, her voice trembling. "When the doctors told me Mom was gone, I waited in that hospital room for hours. Nobody came." Her words hung heavy in the air as tears rolled down her cheeks. Mr. Bennett's face crumpled with grief. "I was stuck in Seattle. The flights were grounded because of the storm. By the time I made it back—" He pressed a hand to his mouth, struggling to continue. "You were already gone." Nathaniel felt a deep ache in his chest as he watched them both struggle with their shared pain. He gently placed his hand on Veronica's shoulder, offering silent support. "Where have you been staying all this time?" Mr. Bennett asked, his voice barely a whisper. Veronica looked down at her worn shoes. "Wherever I could. Shelter sometimes. The street corner where Nathaniel found me mostly." Mr. Bennett staggered slightly, as if physically struck by her words. "The streets?" His voice cracked. "My little girl has been homeless all these years?" Nathaniel stepped forward, keeping his hand on Veronica's shoulder. "Sir, I didn't know she was your daughter, but I promise you, I'll help however I can." "Veronica," he turned to face her, his voice gentle but firm. "I know this is overwhelming, but you're not alone anymore. Whatever happens next, whatever you decide to do, I'll be here to support you." Veronica looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and uncertainty. "You mean that?" "Every word," Nathaniel replied without hesitation. "We'll figure this out together, one step at a time." Mr. Bennett watched their interaction, tears streaming down his face. "All these years," he whispered. "All these years you were right here in the city. If I had just looked harder, if I had—" "You couldn't have known," Nathaniel said softly. "Neither of you could have known." The three of them stood there, surrounded by holiday decorations and stunned party guests, each processing the weight of this moment. Veronica trembled between them, caught between her past and the possibility of a future she never thought she'd have. Veronica sat in her father's elegant living room, her fingers tracing the soft leather of the couch. The room felt too big, too pristine, nothing like the streets she'd called home for so long. "I used to walk that street every day," she confessed to Nathaniel, who sat quietly beside her. "Right after Mom died, I thought if I could just find a job, maybe I could take care of myself. I was so young, but I kept trying. Eventually, it just became home. Nathaniel's heart ached at her words. That's why you were always there, he said softly, understanding dawning on his face. Funny how life works, she said bitterly, glancing around the luxurious room. All this time, he was right here in that building, while I was down there on the street. The sound of footsteps made her tense. Mr. Bennett appeared in the doorway, holding a tray with hot chocolate. I thought you might like something warm, he said hesitantly. Veronica turned away, her jaw tight. I'm not hungry. Mr. Bennett's face fell, but he set the tray down anyway. I'll just leave it here, he said, retreating from the room. Once he was gone, Nathaniel leaned forward. He's trying, Veronica. Trying? She scoffed. Where was all this trying when I was sleeping in doorways, when I was scared and alone? I know you're angry, Nathaniel said gently. You have every right to be. But he's hurting too. He thought he lost you forever. Tears welled up in Veronica's eyes. I can't just pretend everything's okay. These fancy rooms, these nice things, it all feels wrong, like I'm living in someone else's life. Nobody's asking you to pretend, Nathaniel assured her. But maybe you could give him a chance to show you who he is now, to be the father he wishes he could have been back then. Veronica wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't know how, she whispered. Start small, Nathaniel suggested. Maybe try the hot chocolate he made. Talk to him about one memory, just one. You don't have to forgive everything at once. She looked at the steaming mugs on the tray, then back at Nathaniel. Will you stay? While I try? As long as you need me to, he promised, his voice warm and sincere. Veronica nodded slowly, then called out, Dad? Her voice cracked slightly on the word. Could you come back in here? Mr. Bennett led Veronica through the hallway, stopping at a wall filled with framed photographs. This was our old house, he said softly, pointing to a picture of a modest two-story home. Before everything happened. Veronica crossed her arms, keeping her distance. I don't remember it. You used to love the tire swing in the backyard, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. You'd spend hours out there, begging me to push you higher. Well, that was a long time ago, she replied coldly, turning away from the photos. Nathaniel, watching their interaction, felt the heaviness in the air. Hey, he said brightly, there's this great little ice cream shop down the street. Maybe we could all go. Mr. Bennett's eyes lit up. That sounds wonderful. Veronica, you used to love strawberry ice cream. Do you still? I don't want ice cream, she cut him off. But Nathaniel noticed her glancing at the door. Over the next few weeks, Nathaniel suggested more simple outings. Walks in the park, visits to the local bookstore, even a painting class where they all made horrible attempts at landscapes. Each time, the tension eased a little more. One evening, as they walked home from a movie Nathaniel had chosen, Veronica actually laughed at her father's attempt to remember the plot. Dad, that's not what happened at all, she said, shaking her head. The robot was trying to save the city, not destroy it. Mr. Bennett grinned, and Nathaniel noticed how his eyes shone at hearing her call him Dad so naturally. Well, I may have dozed off during that part, he admitted. You always fall asleep during movies, Veronica said, then stopped suddenly, realizing she'd remembered something from their past without bitterness. Her father reached out hesitantly and squeezed her shoulder. This time, she didn't pull away. Next day, Veronica was going through her new closet, trying to make the unfamiliar space feel more like home, when she noticed a loose floorboard. Curious, she knelt down and pried it up, revealing a dusty wooden box underneath. Her hands trembled as she lifted it out. Inside, she found dozens of letters, all addressed to her father in her mother's familiar handwriting. The paper felt delicate beneath her fingers as she opened the first one. Dear Richard, she read quietly. Please stop sending gifts for Veronica. I know you want to be part of her life, but the court's decision was final. Veronica's breath caught in her throat. She grabbed another letter, dated a few months later. The child support checks keep coming, but I won't cash them. We don't need your help. Stop trying to contact us through your lawyer. Letter after letter revealed a story she'd never known. Her father had sent birthday cards that were never delivered, arranged visits that were canceled, and tried repeatedly to maintain contact. Her mother's words grew increasingly bitter with each letter. I found the Christmas presents you left on our doorstep, one letter read. I gave them to charity. Veronica doesn't need reminders of you in her life. Tears rolled down Veronica's cheeks as she discovered a stack of unopened envelopes at the bottom of the box. Cards and letters her father had tried to send her, all returned unopened. Inside one envelope, she found a photo of herself as a toddler, sitting on her father's shoulders at the park, both of them laughing. "Veronica?" Her father's voice came from the doorway. She looked up, her face wet with tears, the letters scattered around her. "You tried to find me," she whispered. "All those years you tried to stay in my life." Her father knelt beside her, picking up one of the letters with shaking hands. "Every month I sent letters, called your mother's lawyer, tried everything I could think of." His voice cracked. "When I heard about the accident, by the time I found out, you were already gone." Veronica stared at the photo in her hands, at the happiness captured in that moment. All these years she'd carried such anger, believing he'd abandoned her. But these letters told a different story, one of a father desperately trying to reach his daughter. "I thought," she started, her voice breaking, "I thought you didn't want me." "Oh, sweetheart," her father said softly. "I've wanted to be your dad every single day since you were born. I never stopped looking for you." Veronica looked at her father, really looked at him, and saw the years of pain etched in his face, matching her own. The wall of resentment she'd built began to crumble. Veronica sat cross-legged on the floor, the letters spread around her like fallen leaves. Her fingers traced the edges of the old photo as she looked up at her father. "Why?" She paused, gathering her courage. "Why did Mom fight so hard to keep you away?" Her father settled onto the floor beside her, careful not to disturb the scattered letters. His shoulders sagged with the weight of old memories. "After the divorce, your mother was hurt and angry. She believed keeping you away from me would protect you." He picked up one of the letters, his hands trembling slightly. "I hired lawyers, filed appeals, did everything I could think of to get visitation rights. But Mom told me you left us," Veronica said softly, her voice catching. "I know." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I sent birthday cards every year, Christmas presents, letters. I even drove by your school sometimes, just hoping to catch a glimpse of you growing up." Nathaniel, who had been quietly standing in the doorway, watched the scene unfold. His heart ached for both of them as they began piecing together their shared past. "Did you—" Veronica hesitated. "Did you ever try to talk to me at school?" "Once," her father admitted, "when you were 9. But your mother had already told the school not to let me near you. The principal threatened to call the police." Veronica's eyes welled up with fresh tears. The anger she'd carried for so long began to dissolve, replaced by a deep sadness for all the years they'd lost. "I would have given anything to be part of your life," her father continued. "When I heard about the accident, I searched everywhere for you, but by then, you'd already disappeared into the streets." Nathaniel stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Veronica's shoulder. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the truth has a way of healing old wounds." Veronica looked up at him gratefully, then back at her father. "I wish I'd known," she whispered. "All this time, I thought." She couldn't finish the sentence. Her father reached out hesitantly, and this time, instead of pulling away, Veronica let him take her hand. "I never stopped being your dad," he said. "Not for a single day." The room fell quiet except for their soft breathing and the rustle of old papers. Nathaniel watched as father and daughter sat together, surrounded by the evidence of a love that had never died, just waited patiently to be discovered. The following week, the morning newspaper landed on the breakfast table with a heavy thud. Veronica stared at the front page headline, her hands shaking. "CEO under investigation. Whistleblower reveals years of financial misconduct. Her father's company logo glared up at her from the page. Beside it, documents showed what looked like altered financial records and suspicious overseas transactions. The words fraud and corruption jumped out at her like accusations. "I can't believe this," she whispered, pushing away from the table. The warm feelings she'd just started to develop toward her father turned cold in her chest. Her mind raced back to all the expensive furniture in the house, the fancy cars in the driveway. Had it all come from stealing? She grabbed her phone and called Nathaniel, her voice trembling. "Have you seen the news?" 20 minutes later, they sat together on a park bench near her father's house. The morning was gray and chilly, matching Veronica's mood perfectly. "What if everything was a lie?" she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "The custody battle, the letters, all of it? What if he's not who I thought he was starting to be?" Nathaniel listened quietly, his face filled with concern. "Veronica, I know this looks bad, but remember how quick you were to judge him before? How different the truth turned out to be." "This is different," she insisted, pulling out the newspaper. "Look at these documents, these numbers. It's right here in black and white." "Headlines can be misleading," Nathaniel said gently, "and documents can be taken out of context. Remember how your mom's letters changed everything you thought you knew? Maybe there's more to this story too." Veronica's eyes filled with tears. "I was just starting to trust him, Nathaniel. Just starting to believe that maybe I could have a real family again." "And maybe you still can," he said, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "But you won't know unless you give him a chance to explain. Talk to him. Ask the hard questions. Listen to his answers." "What if I don't like what I hear?" "Then at least you'll know the truth," Nathaniel replied. "But don't throw away this chance at healing just because of accusations. You've both been through too much to let newspaper headlines tear you apart again." Veronica wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Scared that I've been fooled again." "That's understandable," Nathaniel said. "But you're stronger now. You're not that lonely girl on the street anymore. You can face this, and whatever the truth turns out to be, I'll be right here to help you through it." She nodded slowly, looking down at the newspaper in her lap. The black headlines seemed less threatening somehow, with Nathaniel's reassuring presence beside her. "Will you—" she hesitated. "Will you come with me when I talk to him?" "Of course," Nathaniel smiled warmly. "That's what friends are for." Back at her father's house, Veronica sat rigidly on the edge of an armchair in his study, the newspaper spread out on the mahogany desk between them. Nathaniel stood quietly by the door, a steady presence in the tense room. "How could you?" Veronica's voice cracked. "All these accusations. Are they true?" Her father's face was drawn with worry as he looked at the documents. "It's not what it seems, Veronica. These transactions, they're being presented without context." "What context could possibly explain this?" She jabbed her finger at a highlighted section. "It says here you moved money through shell companies. Those companies were legitimate business partners." He ran a hand through his graying hair. "We were developing new technologies, working on patents. Everything had to be kept confidential to protect our innovations." Veronica shook her head, standing up. "That's convenient, isn't it? Everything's secret, so there's no way to prove what you're saying." "I have documentation," her father said, reaching for his desk drawer. "I can show you." "More papers?" Veronica laughed bitterly. "How do I know those aren't fake, too?" Her father's shoulders slumped. "I know I haven't earned your trust yet, but please, Veronica, after everything we've discovered, everything we've shared." "That's exactly why this hurts so much." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I was starting to believe in you, starting to think maybe." She turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. Nathaniel stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Veronica, remember what we talked about? About not jumping to conclusions?" "This is different," she whispered. "Is it?" Nathaniel moved closer. "Your father is trying to explain. He's willing to show you proof. Doesn't he deserve the same chance you gave those letters from your mother?" Veronica's father looked up, hope flickering in his tired eyes. "I've made mistakes in my life, but I swear to you, fraud isn't one of them. Give me a chance to prove it. Please." "I don't know if I can." Veronica's voice trembled. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to be disappointed again." "You are strong enough," Nathaniel said. "And you're not alone this time. We can look at the evidence together, ask questions, find the truth." The next morning, Veronica sat at the dining room table with stacks of documents spread before her. Nathaniel had taken a day off work to help her sort through everything. Her father had given them complete access to his files, both personal and professional. "Look at this," Nathaniel said, pointing to a series of dates on 2 different documents. "These transactions your father supposedly approved. He was actually in Tokyo during these days." He slid over her father's stamped passport and travel itinerary as proof. Veronica leaned forward, her brow furrowing. Someone else must have authorized them then, but who had that kind of access? They dug deeper into the paperwork. Nathaniel's experience at the law firm helped him spot inconsistencies that might have escaped notice. "The signatures here, they're slightly different from your father's other signatures." Veronica pulled out more documents, comparing them side by side. Her hands trembled slightly as she noticed the differences. "You're right. The loop in the Y is different, and the slant isn't quite the same." As they worked through lunch, barely touching the sandwiches her father's housekeeper had brought, they discovered more discrepancies. Veronica found emails that had been deleted from the server but remained in archived backups, showing conversations that didn't match the official narrative in the leaked documents. "Someone went to a lot of trouble to make this look real," Nathaniel said softly, watching as Veronica's expression shifted from doubt to understanding. "But why?" she asked, running her fingers through her hair. "Who would want to hurt Dad like this?" Nathaniel pointed to several memos they'd uncovered. "Notice how these all trace back to the same department? And look who was passed over for promotion last quarter." Veronica's eyes widened as she connected the dots. Marcus Henderson, Dad's vice president of operations. She shuffled through more papers until she found what she was looking for. He was angry when Dad didn't make him CFO. And he had access to everything needed to create these fake documents, Nathaniel added gently. Tears welled up in Veronica's eyes, but this time they were tears of relief. "I almost lost faith in him again," she whispered. "If you hadn't encouraged me to look deeper." Nathaniel squeezed her hand. "You wanted to believe in him. That's why you agreed to investigate instead of just walking away." Veronica looked at the evidence they'd gathered, feeling a weight lift from her chest. "We need to show this to Dad," she said, her voice stronger now. "He needs to know he's not alone either." Veronica and Nathaniel spent hours combing through personnel files and board meeting minutes. The trail leading from Marcus Henderson opened up new avenues of investigation, revealing connections they hadn't expected. "Wait a minute," Nathaniel said, pulling up an old news article on his phone. "Look at this. Marcus Henderson worked with board member Richard Blackwood at 3 different companies before joining your father's firm." Veronica leaned over to look at the screen, and each time there were similar scandals that forced out the CEO. Her voice hardened as she read further. The companies were then bought out at rock-bottom prices by Blackwood's investment group. They dug deeper into Blackwood's history. The pattern became clear. He would place trusted allies like Henderson in key positions, create scandals through fabricated documents, and then profit from the resulting chaos. "He's done this before," Nathaniel said, spreading out printouts of news articles showing similar situations at other companies. Always the same playbook: fake documents, leaked at just the right time to cause maximum damage. Veronica's hands clenched into fists as she read through the evidence. "And now he's trying to do it to my father." Her voice trembled with anger. All those other CEOs, their reputations were destroyed. Some of them never recovered. Nathaniel watched as Veronica gathered the most damning evidence into a neat pile. "What are you thinking?" "I'm going to confront Blackwood," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "He's in his office right now. I checked his schedule through Dad's assistant." "Are you sure that's wise?" Nathaniel asked, concern evident in his voice. "Maybe we should take this to the authorities first." Veronica shook her head. No, I want to see his face when he realizes we've figured it out. I want him to know that he picked the wrong family to mess with this time. She straightened her shoulders, looking more confident than Nathaniel had ever seen her. Will you come with me? Nathaniel nodded without hesitation. Of course. Always. They gathered their evidence and headed to the executive floor. Veronica's steps were purposeful as she strode down the hallway, past startled secretaries and wide-eyed executives. Nathaniel stayed close behind, carrying their carefully organized files. Outside Blackwood's office, his secretary started to protest, but Veronica walked past her desk with such authority that the woman fell silent. She pushed open the heavy wooden door to find Richard Blackwood sitting behind his massive desk, looking up in surprise at the interruption. "Miss Walker," he said smoothly, recovering quickly. "This is unexpected." "I'm sure it is," Veronica replied, her voice cold and clear. She dropped the first file on his desk. "Just like finding these connections between you and Marcus Henderson was unexpected." Blackwood's practiced smile faltered slightly as he glanced at the documents. "I don't know what you're implying." "I think you do," Veronica cut him off, laying down more evidence. 3 companies, 3 scandals, 3 hostile takeovers, and now you're trying for a 4th with my father's company. After confronting Blackwood, Veronica and Nathaniel rushed to Richard's office, their arms full of evidence. When they burst through the door, Richard looked up from his desk, his face etched with worry lines that had deepened over the past few days. "Dad," Veronica called out, her voice steady and strong, "we found something you need to see." They spread the documents across his desk while Nathaniel explained their discovery. "Mr. Walker, we've uncovered a pattern. Blackwood and Henderson have done this before at other companies." Richard's eyes widened as he examined the evidence. His hands trembled slightly as he read through the old news articles and financial records. This changes everything. Within hours, Richard called an emergency press conference. The large conference room buzzed with reporters and cameras, their flashes creating a storm of light. Veronica stood beside her father at the podium, with Nathaniel watching proudly from the side. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his voice clear and confident. "Recent allegations against this company have painted a picture of corruption and dishonesty. Today I stand before you with evidence that tells a very different story." He methodically presented the evidence Veronica and Nathaniel had uncovered, explaining Blackwood's pattern of corporate sabotage. The reporters leaned forward in their seats, furiously taking notes as Richard revealed the truth. "These documents," Richard held up the files, "show a clear pattern of deliberate deception, orchestrated by board member Richard Blackwood and his associate Marcus Henderson. They have attempted this same scheme at 3 other companies." The room erupted with questions, but Richard remained composed. "Thanks to my daughter Veronica and her friend Nathaniel, we've uncovered the truth. The supposedly incriminating documents were fabricated, part of a calculated plan to destabilize this company for personal gain." Nathaniel watched Veronica standing tall beside her father, her chin held high. The scared young woman he'd met on that street corner had transformed into someone powerful and determined. His heart swelled with pride as she fielded questions from reporters, explaining her role in uncovering the truth with clarity and confidence. As the press conference concluded, the headlines were already changing. "Corporate scandal revealed" as elaborate setup flashed across news tickers. The truth was finally emerging, clearing Richard's name and exposing the real corruption within the company. In a quiet moment after the reporters left, Nathaniel approached Veronica. "You were amazing," he said softly. "The way you handled everything, finding the evidence, confronting Blackwood, standing up there with your father. I'm so proud of you." Veronica's eyes glistened with tears, but she was smiling. "I couldn't have done it without you, Nathaniel. You've believed in me from the very beginning, even when I was just a stranger on a street corner." The morning after the press conference, Veronica sat at her father's kitchen table, watching the sunrise paint the sky in soft pinks and oranges. The morning newspaper lay spread before her, its headline declaring her father's innocence. Her fingers traced over the words, and a warm feeling of accomplishment spread through her chest. Richard entered the kitchen, still in his robe, and paused when he saw her. His eyes were soft with emotion. "I never got to properly thank you. he said, his voice thick. "What you did, standing up for me, investigating everything, it means more than you could know." Veronica looked up at her father, really seeing him for the first time. Not as the CEO who had abandoned her, but as a man who had fought to keep her in his life. "I couldn't let them destroy your reputation," she said softly. "Not when I finally understood the truth." Richard pulled out a chair and sat beside her. "You showed such courage, such determination. You remind me so much of your mother." He reached into his robe pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. "She would have been so proud of you." The photo showed her mother holding a young Veronica, both of them laughing at something beyond the camera. Richard's finger was visible at the edge of the frame, evidence that he had been the one taking the picture. Veronica felt tears well up in her eyes. "I found more photos," Richard said gently. "Albums full of them, from before. Everything. Would you like to look through them with me?" Veronica nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Richard disappeared for a moment and returned with several photo albums. Together, they began flipping through pages of memories. Birthday parties, beach trips, ordinary moments that suddenly seemed precious. "I never stopped loving you," Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Even when I couldn't be there, even when the lawyer said I had to stay away, I never stopped thinking about you." Veronica reached out and took her father's hand. "I know that now," she said. "And I'm ready. I'm ready to be home." Richard squeezed her hand, tears rolling down his cheeks. "This has always been your home, sweetheart. Always." They sat together in the morning light, looking through photographs and sharing stories. For the first time since moving in, Veronica felt truly comfortable in the house. The walls that had seemed so imposing now felt protective, and the rooms that had felt foreign now held promise of new memories to come. As they reached the end of an album, Veronica looked around the kitchen, at the coffee maker gurgling in the corner, the family photos on the refrigerator, the morning light streaming through the windows, and felt something settle in her heart. This was where she belonged. This was home. Richard started small, knowing that rebuilding their relationship would take time and patience. Each evening after dinner, he would invite Veronica to his study, a cozy room lined with books and family photographs he'd kept all these years. "Would you like to hear a story?" he asked one night, holding up an old, leather-bound book of fairy tales. "This was your favorite when you were little." Veronica hesitated, then nodded, settling into the plush armchair beside his desk. As Richard's warm voice filled the room with tales of far-off places and magical adventures, she found herself transported back to fragments of memories, sitting on her mother's lap, listening to these same stories. During weekends, Richard took her to places that held special meaning. They visited the park where she had learned to ride a bike, and he showed her the ice cream shop where they used to get Sunday treats. At each location, he shared stories about their past, filling in the blank spaces in her memory. "You always ordered strawberry," he told her as they sat at the ice cream parlor, "and you'd get so excited when they added extra sprinkles." Veronica smiled, looking down at her strawberry cone. Some things hadn't changed. At the office, Richard proudly introduced her to everyone as his daughter, his face beaming with pride. He showed her his work, explaining what he did with genuine enthusiasm, and always made time to have lunch with her in his office, even on his busiest days. "This building might seem intimidating," he told her, "but it's just brick and glass. What matters are the people inside it, the relationships we build." Little by little, Veronica began to respond to these gestures. She started joining him in his study before he could ask, curling up in what had become her chair. She began asking questions about the stories he read, about his work, about their shared past. One evening, as Richard was showing her old home videos in the living room, Veronica noticed how his voice would crack with emotion when he spoke about certain memories. She saw the way his hands trembled slightly when he handled old photographs, and how his eyes lit up whenever she laughed at something he said. "I kept everything," he told her, opening a box filled with her childhood drawings. "Every card, every picture you drew, even the macaroni art from kindergarten." Veronica picked up a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures, herself, her mother, and her father, holding hands under a rainbow. The word family was written across the top in wobbly letters. "I remember drawing this," she said softly, touching the faded paper. "Mom hung it on the fridge." Richard nodded, his eyes misty. "She was so proud of everything you did." We both were. These quiet moments of sharing, these daily rituals of connection, began to weave themselves into the fabric of their new life together. Veronica found herself looking forward to their evening stories, their weekend outings, their shared meals. The house that had once felt like a stranger's home was slowly transforming into her sanctuary, filled with both old memories and new ones they were creating together. Nathaniel watched with quiet joy as Veronica and her father grew closer each day. During their regular evening chats, he would help Richard brainstorm ideas for activities that might interest Veronica, drawing from everything he'd learned about her during their time together on the streets. "She mentioned loving art when she was younger," Nathaniel suggested one afternoon in Richard's office. "Maybe we could all visit the new exhibition at the City Gallery?" Richard's face lit up at the suggestion. "That's perfect. She used to spend hours drawing when she was little." The next weekend, the 3 of them walked through the bright gallery spaces together. Nathaniel hung back slightly, letting father and daughter take the lead, but stayed close enough to offer encouraging smiles when Veronica looked his way. He noticed how she pointed out certain paintings to her father, sharing her thoughts about the colors and techniques. "Remember how you told me about wanting to learn to paint?" Nathaniel asked during their lunch break at the gallery cafe. "Your dad mentioned there's a great art studio nearby that offers classes." Richard immediately picked up on the suggestion. "We could sign you up if you'd like, sweetheart. Maybe we could even take a class together." Veronica's eyes sparkled at the idea, and Nathaniel felt warmth spread through his chest seeing her smile. During family game nights, which had become a regular occurrence, Nathaniel joined them around the coffee table, often partnering with Richard to let Veronica win at charades or Pictionary. He loved seeing her competitive spirit emerge as she got more comfortable, the way she would playfully tease her father when she won. "You're getting pretty good at this," Nathaniel told her one evening after she'd beaten them both at Scrabble. "Soon you'll be unbeatable." "Well, I learned from the best," she replied, glancing at her father with a small but genuine smile. Nathaniel also helped Richard plan special surprises for Veronica. When Richard mentioned wanting to recreate some of her childhood traditions, Nathaniel suggested making her favorite cookies from when she was little. The 3 of them spent a Saturday afternoon in the kitchen, flour everywhere, laughing as they tried to follow her mother's old recipe. "These taste just like Mom's," Veronica said softly, taking a bite of the warm cookie. Richard put his arm around her shoulders, and Nathaniel saw tears glistening in both their eyes. Through it all, Nathaniel remained a steady presence, offering support when needed and stepping back when father and daughter needed space to bond. He celebrated every small victory, every shared laugh, every moment of understanding between them, knowing how far they'd come from those cold nights on the street corner. "Thank you," Richard told him one day, "for being there for her when I couldn't be, and for helping me be there for her now." Nathaniel just smiled, watching through the window as Veronica tended to the small garden they'd started together in the backyard. "She deserves all the happiness in the world," he replied simply. One evening, as Veronica sat reading in the living room, her father entered carrying a large, carefully wrapped package. Nathaniel, who had been helping with dinner preparations, watched from the doorway as Richard nervously approached his daughter. "I've been working on this for a while," Richard said softly, placing the package in Veronica's lap. "I wanted to show you that even when we were apart, you were always in my thoughts." Veronica's fingers trembled slightly as she unwrapped the gift, revealing a handcrafted leather-bound book. The cover was embossed with her name in elegant gold letters. "What is this?" she whispered, running her hand over the smooth surface. "Open it," her father encouraged, sitting beside her on the couch. As Veronica opened the first page, she gasped. There, carefully preserved, was a photo of her mother holding her as a newborn. Beside it, her father had written the story of the day she was born. "You were so tiny," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother said you had the strongest grip she'd ever felt when you held her finger." Page after page revealed treasured moments from her childhood, her first steps, her first day of kindergarten, birthday parties, and quiet family moments. There were report cards, drawings she'd made, and even dried flowers from a bouquet she'd picked for her mother. "How did you get all of these?" Veronica asked, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Your mother kept everything," Richard explained. After the accident, I searched everywhere to find these memories. I wanted to save them for you, to show you that you were loved every single day, even when I couldn't be there." Veronica's hands shook as she turned to a section filled with letters in her mother's handwriting. They were diary entries, describing little moments of Veronica's childhood, the way she laughed, the songs she loved to sing, the stories she made up. "Mom wrote all this?" Veronica's voice cracked. Richard nodded. "She wanted to make sure you'd always remember how special you were. She documented everything, hoping that someday we could all share these memories together." Veronica paused at a photo of herself at age 6, dressed as a butterfly for Halloween. Her mother's note beside it read, "Our little butterfly spreads her wings more each day. Richard would be so proud to see how brave and beautiful she's becoming. I was there in spirit watching you grow through these photos and notes," Richard said softly. "I kept them safe, hoping that one day I could share them with you and tell you how much I missed being part of your life." Veronica leaned into her father's embrace, clutching the memory book to her chest. Tears flowed freely as she understood the depth of love contained in its pages, not just from her mother, but from her father who had carefully preserved each precious memory. In the days that followed, Veronica spent hours poring over the memory book with her father. Each evening, they would sit together in the cozy study, with Richard sharing stories behind every photograph and memento. The warm glow of the desk lamp cast a gentle light over their heads as they huddled close, turning pages and building bridges across the years they'd lost. "Tell me more about this one," Veronica would say, pointing to different pictures, her voice soft with wonder rather than the defensive tone that had marked their early interactions. Richard's eyes would light up at each question, eager to fill in the blanks of her childhood. "Here, you were trying to bake cookies with your mother," he explained one evening, pointing to a photo of a flour-covered toddler. "You insisted on cracking the eggs yourself and, well," he chuckled warmly, "let's just say more ended up on the floor than in the bowl." Veronica found herself laughing along, imagining the scene. The weight of anger she'd carried for so long began to lift, replaced by something warmer, something that felt like belonging. Their shared meals became longer, filled with conversation instead of awkward silences. Richard learned to make her favorite breakfast, chocolate chip pancakes, and would have them ready every Sunday morning, just the way she liked them. These simple gestures spoke volumes about his desire to be the father she needed. Nathaniel, who still visited regularly, noticed the transformation in their relationship. He watched as Veronica's guarded expressions melted into genuine smiles when her father entered the room. The way she would automatically lean into Richard's hugs instead of stiffening at his touch, the sound of their shared laughter echoing through the house. One afternoon, as Nathaniel helped Veronica organize her new room, she paused while hanging up a photo of her and her father at the park. "You know," she said quietly, "I never thought I could feel this way about him. I was so angry for so long, but now..." She touched the frame gently. "Now I can't imagine not having him in my life." Nathaniel smiled warmly, his heart full at seeing the peace that had settled over her. "Sometimes the best things in life take time and patience," he said. "Your father never stopped loving you, and now you both have the chance to build something beautiful together." Veronica turned to him, her eyes bright with gratitude. "Thank you, Nathaniel, for everything. For being there when I was alone, for believing in me, for helping me give him a chance. You helped me find my way home." The transformation was evident in countless small moments, the way Veronica would now seek out her father's advice, how she began leaving little notes for him on his desk, the proud smile on Richard's face when he watched her reading in his library. Their relationship had bloomed into something genuine and deep, built on understanding and forgiveness. Richard drove carefully along the winding coastal road, stealing glances at Veronica in the passenger seat. The morning sun sparkled on the ocean waves, and a gentle breeze carried the salty scent through the partially opened windows. He hadn't told her where they were going, but his hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter as they approached their destination. "Almost there," he said softly, turning onto a narrow path that led to a small beach cove. Veronica's eyes widened as they parked. The secluded beach stretched before them, its white sand dotted with smooth rocks and shells. Something about this place tugged at her memory, like a half-remembered dream. "Your mother and I used to bring you here when you were just learning to walk," Richard explained, his voice thick with emotion. "You loved the tide pools. We'd spend hours looking at the tiny crabs and starfish." Veronica stepped out of the car, her feet sinking slightly into the soft sand. As she walked toward the water's edge, fragments of memories began to surface. The sound of her mother's laughter, the feeling of tiny shells in her small hands, the warmth of being held between both her parents. "I remember," she whispered, reaching down to pick up a smooth piece of sea glass. "Mom used to collect these. She'd say they were like little pieces of treasure." Richard nodded, moving to stand beside her. "She kept every single one you found for her. There's still a jar full of them in my study." He paused, watching as Veronica turned the sea glass over in her palm. "You have her eyes, you know, the same way they light up when you discover something special." Tears welled up in Veronica's eyes as more memories emerged. "We had a picnic here once," she said, pointing to a flat rock formation. "Mom packed strawberries, and I got juice all over my white dress." Richard laughed softly, the sound mixing with the gentle crash of waves. "She wasn't even mad. She just said it looked like you'd tie-dyed it yourself." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a weathered photo album. "I brought these. I thought you might want to see them." Together they sat on the sand, looking through photographs of their family days at this very beach. Each picture told a story, and Richard shared them all. The time Veronica had chased seagulls until she fell asleep in the sand. The day she found her first starfish. The afternoon they built an enormous sandcastle that the tide washed away. As they looked through the photos, Veronica leaned against her father's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his presence and the comfort of shared memories. The ocean breeze carried the same salt-sweet scent she remembered from her childhood, and for the first time in years she felt completely connected to both her past and her present. "Thank you for bringing me here, Dad," she said softly, her hand finding his. "It means everything to remember these moments with Mom, and to make new memories with you." Richard squeezed her hand gently, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the waves roll in, just as they had done so many years ago as a family. As Veronica turned another page in the memory book, a sealed envelope slipped out and fell onto her lap. Her heart skipped a beat when she recognized her mother's delicate handwriting on the front. The envelope was yellowed with age but had never been opened. With trembling fingers, she carefully broke the seal. Inside was a letter dated just weeks before her mother's accident. Veronica's breath caught in her throat as she began to read. "My dearest Richard, I've written this letter 100 times in my head, but putting it on paper makes everything feel so real. Seeing you with Veronica at her school play last month, even though we kept our distance, showed me what I've known in my heart all along. We were wrong to let our fears tear our family apart. Veronica asks about you more often now. I see the way she looks at other kids with their dads, and it breaks my heart knowing that her father has always loved her so deeply. The custody battle, the harsh words, the mistakes we both made, none of that matters anymore. I think it's time for us to try again for Veronica's sake. She deserves to have both her parents in her life. I've been too stubborn, too afraid of the past, but watching her grow up without you feels like we're all missing pieces of ourselves. I plan to reach out after her birthday next month. Maybe we can start small, coffee, conversations about Veronica, building trust again. She's so much like you sometimes, with that same gentle determination." Tears splashed onto the paper, and Veronica had to pause to wipe her eyes. Her hands shook as she held the letter that represented what could have been. Her mother had wanted to bring their family back together. They had been so close to having everything change. "Dad?" she called out, her voice cracking. Richard came into the room, concern etched on his face. When he saw the letter, he froze. "I've never seen this before," he said softly, sitting beside her on the couch. "Your mother. She never got the chance to send it." Veronica leaned into her father's embrace, clutching the letter. "She was going to reach out to you. We could have been a family again." The weight of what they'd lost, and what they'd almost regained, felt overwhelming. Richard held her closer, his own tears falling. "Your mother had the biggest heart. She always did what she thought was best for you, even when it was difficult." "She was trying to fix everything," Veronica whispered, running her fingers over her mother's words. "She wanted us to be together again." The letter represented both heartbreak and hope, the pain of what they'd lost and the love that had never truly died. In her mother's careful handwriting, Veronica could see all the dreams and plans that had never come to be, but also the deep love that had always connected their family, even when they were apart. Veronica held the letter close to her heart, letting her mother's words sink deep into her soul. All the anger she had carried for years, the bitter thoughts, the harsh judgments about her father, began to melt away like snow in spring sunshine. Her mother's last wish had been to reunite their family, to heal the very wounds that Veronica had nursed for so long. "Dad," she said softly, looking up at her father through tear-filled eyes. "I'm so sorry. All this time, I thought—" Her voice broke as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Richard gently squeezed her shoulder. "You had every right to be angry, sweetheart. You were just a little girl who lost her mother and didn't understand why her father wasn't there." From his quiet spot near the doorway, Nathaniel watched the scene unfold. His heart swelled as he witnessed the walls between father and daughter finally crumble completely. This was the moment he had hoped for since that first evening he'd found Veronica alone on the street corner. Veronica turned to fully face her father, her eyes clear and bright despite her tears. "But you never stopped trying to reach me, did you? Even when everything was working against you, you kept trying." "Every single day," Richard whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You were always in my thoughts, always in my heart." Veronica threw her arms around her father, hugging him tightly. The letter fluttered to the floor as she pressed her face against his shoulder, letting out years of pent-up hurt and anger in deep, cleansing sobs. Richard held her close, his own tears falling freely as he stroked her hair, just as he had when she was small. Nathaniel felt tears prick at his own eyes as he watched the healing power of truth transform their relationship. The guarded, angry girl he had first met was becoming whole again, finding peace in her father's love. It was beautiful to witness, like watching a flower finally bloom after a long, hard winter. "I love you, Dad," Veronica said, her words muffled against his shoulder but clear enough to make Richard's breath catch. "I love you too, sweetheart, so very much." The letter lay forgotten on the floor for now, its purpose fulfilled. It had been the key to unlocking Veronica's heart, allowing her to finally accept the love that had always been there, waiting patiently for her to be ready to receive it. Richard sat in his home office the next morning, the morning light streaming through the tall windows as he carefully arranged papers on his desk. Veronica sat across from him, watching as he pulled out a fresh notepad and uncapped his favorite pen. "Your mother always had the biggest heart," he said, his voice gentle with remembrance. "She would have given her last dollar to help someone in need." Veronica nodded, thinking of the letter and all it had revealed about her mother. She really would have. "That's why," Richard continued, straightening in his chair, "I want to announce something important. I've been thinking about this since you came back into my life, and after reading your mother's letter, I know it's exactly what we need to do." He began sketching out plans on the notepad. "I want to create the Sarah Matthews Foundation, named after your mother. It will be dedicated to helping children who are alone, just like you were. No child should have to experience what you went through." Veronica's eyes widened as she leaned forward to look at his notes. "A foundation? Really?" "Yes," Richard said firmly. "We'll focus on helping orphaned children and homeless youth. Emergency housing, education support, counseling. Everything I wish someone had been there to provide for you." Tears welled up in Veronica's eyes as she watched her father outline his vision. This wasn't just about remembering her mother. It was about turning their family's pain into purpose, their loss into hope for others. "The foundation will work directly with social services," Richard explained, his enthusiasm growing. "We'll create programs to ensure no child falls through the cracks of the system. Your mother would have wanted that." "She would have loved this," Veronica whispered, her heart swelling with pride. The bitter memories of her time on the streets began to transform into something meaningful, a way to help others avoid the same struggles. Richard reached across the desk and took her hand. "And I want you to be part of it, Veronica. Your experience, your strength. You could help us understand exactly what these kids need." Veronica squeezed his hand, feeling a new sense of purpose flood through her. The foundation would be more than just a charity. It would be her mother's legacy, a testament to her loving spirit and desire to help others. It would also be a symbol of healing, of how her family had found its way back together. "Can we start right away?" she asked, wiping away happy tears. "There are so many kids out there who need help, who feel as lost as I did." Richard smiled warmly. "We'll begin the paperwork today. The Sarah Matthews Foundation will be your mother's gift to the world, and our way of making sure her love continues to touch lives." Veronica stood up and walked around the desk to hug her father. As she embraced him, she felt the weight of her past lifting, replaced by the lightness of hope and purpose. Her family's story, with all its pain and redemption, would now become a beacon of hope for others. The grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel sparkled with elegant decorations as guests filed in for the Sarah Matthews Foundation launch event. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the gathering crowd, while photographs of smiling children and families lined the walls, telling stories of hope and new beginnings. Veronica stood backstage, smoothing her navy blue dress with trembling hands. Nathaniel gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You've got this," he whispered. "Just speak from your heart." Her father adjusted his tie, looking at her with pride. "Your mother would be so proud of you, sweetheart." "I know I am." Taking a deep breath, Veronica stepped onto the stage, the spotlight warm on her face. The crowd hushed as she approached the microphone, her father and Nathaniel standing supportively behind her. "A few months ago," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves, "I was sitting on a cold street corner wondering if anyone in this world cared about what happened to me." She glanced at Nathaniel, who nodded encouragingly. "Then a kind man stopped to offer me a warm meal. That simple act of kindness changed everything." The audience listened intently as Veronica continued. "I had lost my mother, and with her I thought I'd lost any chance at having a family. I was angry, hurt, and alone. But sometimes life has a way of bringing people together in the most unexpected ways." Her voice cracked slightly as she looked at her father. "Through an amazing twist of fate, I found my father again. Or rather, he found me. And though our path hasn't been easy, we discovered that love and forgiveness are stronger than any pain from the past." Tears glistened in many eyes throughout the room as Veronica shared her story. The Sarah Matthews Foundation isn't just about providing shelter or food, though those things are crucial. It's about showing children who feel alone that they matter, that someone cares, that there's always hope. She gestured to Nathaniel and her father. "These two men showed me that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who choose to stand by you, who believe in you even when you've stopped believing in yourself. That's what we want to give to every child who needs it." The audience rose to their feet, moved by Veronica's words. Her father wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and Nathaniel beamed with pride. In that moment, standing before the crowd, Veronica felt the full circle of her journey, from lost and alone to found and loved, ready to help others find their way home too. After the foundation launch on a crisp Sunday morning, Veronica stood between her father at her mother's grave. The marble headstone gleamed in the gentle sunlight, fresh flowers adding bright splashes of color against the stone. Sarah Matthews' name was etched clearly, along with the words, "Beloved Mother and Wife." "Mom would have loved seeing everyone together like this," Veronica said softly, placing a single white rose on the grave. Her father nodded, his eyes misty with memories. "She always wanted us to be a family again," he shared, his voice thick with emotion. "I remember how she used to talk about your first steps, your first words. She documented everything in those letters." Veronica laughed softly, wiping away a tear. "I was so nervous that night, I almost didn't go in." She turned to her father. "And then you walked in and recognized me immediately." "How could I not?" her father replied, squeezing her shoulder. "You have your mother's eyes. The moment I saw you, it was like seeing her again." "I wish I could tell Mom about the foundation," Veronica said, tracing her mother's name on the stone, "about how her memory will help so many children find their way home." "She knows," her father assured her. "Somehow, I believe she brought us all together. She always had a way of making impossible things happen." Standing there together, they represented a journey that had come full circle, from broken pieces to a complete picture, from loss to love, from separation to unity. The morning sun wrapped them in its warm embrace as they honored the woman who, even in absence, had helped heal their hearts and bring them together. If you enjoyed the story of Nathaniel, Veronica, and Richard, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.